Hello and welcome to a special afternoon stream where me and Aaron are going to pore over the pretty momentous election results from last night. This isn't replacing Novara Live this evening. We'll be doing that as well with more results and especially sort of lots of reaction. We're not going to show you any clips for this. This is just results. Aaron Bastani and myself. Aaron will bring up some detailed results in a moment. I suppose the big takeaways are that Reform won the Runcorn by-election by 6 votes. Keir Starmer didn't turn up, by the way, so there are questions if he had bothered, maybe those 6 extra people would have turned out. Of the 5 mayoral races that have so far declared, Reform comfortably won one of them. Labour very uncomfortably held 3, and the Tories won 1 from Labour, and we'll go through some of the council elections as well. Good for Reform at the moment, it seems. Your initial takeaways, Aaron, what do our viewers need to know?
These are the most, I think, significant local election results in decades. And that is with many authorities having cancelled their elections for this year because of merging of authorities, getting rid of authorities, the Labour devolution programme. Notwithstanding that, even with the pared back elections we've seen, utterly extraordinary, Michael. I think what sticks out for me is the west of England, which is on paper one of the most progressive parts of the country. You know, this is part of the country, if you look at the general election map of the last 2 elections, really, it's, Labour, Green, Lib Dem, Aaron Banks, the most right-wing figure imaginable in the Reform Party, heavily Farage-coded, came within 2% of winning that. They came second. It was a 3-way between the Greens, Reform and Labour. I think that's really significant. And in the by-election, this was a seat where Labour won more than 50% of the vote less than 12 months ago. They've just lost it, like you say, by 6 votes. Maybe if Starmer had gone, they would have kept it. But I went there and I actually saw in a hustings the Reform candidate, Sarah Pochin. She was deeply unimpressive. She was not an impressive person. And I don't think she would have won Reform that many votes. So, it kind of works both ways. To beat Labour in a by-election when they have the advantage of an incredible data operation for their postal votes, to beat that is very, very hard. Reform have done it. Now, Reform only have 4 MPs at the moment. Of course, they won 5 in the last general election. And the Brexit Party and UKIP before have done okay in various elections and whatnot, by-elections, and so on, when somebody's defected and then there's been a subsequent by-election in the case of UKIP. But this is new. To have a by-election and to beat Labour when they've had this kind of majority is new. And it's very, very, very hard. You saw it in Peterborough in 2019. Labour just held on there in a by-election. I think it was about 600 votes. They kept the majority of that, more or less. That was in, the tumult of the sort of Brexit, Leave, Remain debate. They got this over the line. It's a really, really big deal, Michael. What they've just done is very, very, very hard. And on the one hand, you could say, well, it's Labour's 16th seat. Labour should win it. Reform, have no right to be winning these kinds of seats, which is true. But if you want to be forming a government, as Reform claim they want to do, you need to be winning by-elections in these kinds of circumstances. They just did that. Doesn't mean they're going to form a government, but they've jumped a really important hurdle, and I think a really big psychological barrier as well for them.
Let's bring up the Runcorn results, Gary. So Runcorn and Helsby, and you can see Reform with Sarah Pochin got 38.7%, up 20 points from the general election. Labour with Karen Shaw got 38.7%. Also, I suppose you need a few more decimals to see the difference between them because Reform was only 6 points ahead. And Labour are down 14 points. So this is a vote for Reform and a vote against Labour. You can see that most people in the constituency seem to have recognised this was a 2-horse race because no one else did particularly well in the constituency at all. This was between Reform and Labour, and Reform came out on top. 46.2% might seem low, but I'm guessing 46%. It's not that bad for a by-election. I think by-election turnout can be really low, so that might not be too poor a showing. Should we go through the mayoralties as well, Gary? Or should we? Yeah, well, let's just start with Lincoln as well because this is the one that Reform won and won comfortably. This was with Andrea Jenkins. You might remember her. She was a big fan of Boris Johnson when she was a Tory MP. After losing the election last year. She joined Reform, and they won comfortably in Greater Lincolnshire on 42%. In second place, you've got the Tories on 26%. Labour just miles away at 12%. Aaron, Runcorn, Lincolnshire, I suppose in a way, because the by-election, I mean, as you said, it's significant because this was a safe Labour seat, and Reform have shown that they can be competitive in seats like this, at least in by-elections. Obviously, by-elections are somewhat different to general elections. That doesn't mean that Reform are going to win all but 16 seats and Labour are only going to win 15, right? There'll be a somewhat different dynamic, but they can perform well in seats like that. It might be these mayoralties that are the big deal, and I suppose especially the councils, because we haven't got Reform politicians in positions of authority in the country yet. We already have some MPs, so the fact that they've gone from 4 to 5, presumably that's not going to have a sort of revolutionary difference or determining impact when it comes to how they're covered or how people think of Reform. But having a mayor, having some councils, which we'll get onto, that's potentially more significant. What do you think?
Yes, and the good thing with mayors is, Michael, that they have a tremendous amount of profile. Think of Andy Burnham, think of Sadiq Khan, but they don't actually have that much power. So if you're Reform, I think you probably want lots of mayors as national figureheads, quite visible in the national conversation outside of London. Local authorities are somewhat different. You will get the blame for stuff if stuff goes wrong in your local authority. We'll talk about those more in a moment. Reform are now going to control councils, very big authorities. Mayors and local authorities, slightly different. I think there's a hell of a lot more upside if you're an outsider party getting a mayoralty. The Tories came second in Greater Lincolnshire, decent vote, I think 64,000. What's significant here is that Reform got more votes than Labour and the Tories combined. And furthermore, it's very difficult for a new party with not much for ground operation to win in these mayoral races. It's very hard. It's very hard for Reform. It's very hard for the Greens. It's very hard for an independent. As we saw with Jamie Driscoll in the Northeast not so long ago, last year. Very, very hard. Why? Because you're talking about very large areas with get out the vote, with the data that's needed, the ground operation. If you've got the legacy information, if you're Labour in Runcorn, you've got all the data from local elections, you've got all the data from general elections, okay? Even though that constituency comprises some rural areas as well, it's quite manageable. For somebody like the Greens in the west of England, where you have this huge area, right, you need your canvassers to be in cars constantly zipping up and down. Much, much harder. So for Reform to win like that in Greater Lincolnshire, which, favours the Tory vote historically, is deeply impressive, Michael. It is deeply impressive because those factors really sort of militate against insurgents performing well. I think, and some people are attacking the Greens for not doing so well in the west of England. They came third in effectively a three-way race. It is very, very hard for these smaller parties to do well in mayoral races. It's very hard because you're talking about such large geographical areas where often actually people don't really think of themselves as being part of this particular entity. We're probably going to get a new mayoralty in the south, which is going to include Portsmouth and Southampton. They hate each other, right? In the north, where Jamie Driscoll is running, you've got, I think, the authority includes Sunderland and Newcastle in the same authority, right? So it's difficult to generate a grassroots, campaign about local identity and getting them to vote for these offices. So to do that so well in Greater Lincolnshire is a really, really big achievement for Reform. Really big. You're not going to hear that. That's Andrea Jenkins was the favourite. And yes, it's true. Constituencies in that part of the world will tend towards Reform. But the nature of this particular office, I think it's a really big achievement for them. In some ways, I think the scale of that win, getting more votes than Labour and the Tories combined, is a bigger deal than the by-election. Of course, the by-election, like I say, big psychological barrier. But logistically, to do what they've done in Greater Lincolnshire is really, really impressive.
Now let's go to the mayoralties that Labour held, although by the skin of their teeth. So West of England mayor, this was the one where we showed you some polling, I think last week, that suggested the Greens could win this. So this will be disappointing for the Greens. Labour win on 25% of the vote, which is not much of a mandate. Worth noting, actually, there used to be second preference voting when it came to mayoralties. The Tories got rid of it last time around because they came first in first preferences in Peterborough But Labour won on second preferences, so they're like, let's change the rules. So that's why there isn't second preference voting here anymore, and you can just win on 25%. Aaron Banks on 22.1%, so very close to Bristol. Obviously, West of England covers more than just Bristol, but Bristol, one of, I think, England's most liberal cities. They could have had Aaron Banks as their mayor. That would have been very embarrassing, I think. The Greens on 20%, and the Conservatives on 16.6%, and the Lib Dems on 14%. So only 11 points difference between the party who came first and the party who came fifth. In a way, a sort of 5-horse race there. Doncaster, similar story, actually. So Labour win with 32.6% of the vote. Reform, very, very close. 31.6% of the vote. So only 1 point between them. And then the Tories, I suppose you can say, maybe that divided the right-wing vote because they got 26%. And then with North Tyneside, Karen Clark on 30.2% and Reform on 29.4%. So again, super, super close. Labour will be very, very relieved that they kept, all three of these. The Tories on 20.5%. This could have been much worse for Labour. I suppose they could say could have been much better because they only lost Runcorn by 6 votes, right? So if they'd have won that, there would have been a different narrative. But if they'd lost any of these, and it was close, so it's sort of 700 votes in the Doncaster result. If 700 people had voted a different way, it would have been very different. 500 votes in the North Tyneside. It could have been a bigger blowout for Labour, couldn't it?
To some extent, yes, but I would just return to my points previously, Michael, that the nature of these contests really does militate against successful reform or the Green Party. It really does favour Labour or the Tories, even the Liberal Democrats, who are, they are the experts when it comes to hyperlocal campaigning and by-elections, struggle in these contests. These mayoral contests, because they're combined authorities. If you look at the West of England, Michael, this is really extraordinary. Okay, Aaron Banks came in within the margin of error of winning that competition. The membership of the combined authority, which is to say you've got a number of local authorities put together, that's the West of England combined authority. That authority has the mayor, who's now Helen Godwin. She's the mayor of the West of England. It includes Bath and North East Somerset Council, Lib Dem, Bristol City Council, Green, and South Gloucestershire Council, Labour. Okay, so like you say, it's not just Bristol here. We're talking about Bath. We're talking about North East Somerset. We're talking about South Gloucestershire. This has absolutely no right to have a reform mayor. It's wild, and in some ways, even though Reform didn't win in the West of England, that to me is a really striking performance. And I also do think that the Greens need to look at themselves, I think, quite self-critically. Like I said, these kinds of contests don't favour them. But in the West of England, they had a really outstanding opportunity to get somebody on the national stage, a national figurehead to be taken really seriously. This was their moment to break through. They failed to do it, right? Dan Norris, of course, the disgraced, now former West of England mayor, facing very significant charges relating to images of a sexual nature, etc. Horrific charges. If you can't, in an area of the world, by the way, where I think they're going to pick up maybe 3 seats at the next general election, Bristol Central, South, and North, maybe another one too. If you can't pick up that mayoralty, I think questions should be asked actually about the broader strategy. But that was the one that really got me, Michael. If Reform and winning places like Doncaster, given all the factors I'm talking about, you were joking about Labour only getting 15 seats. I mean, that they would be. I'm not being overly dramatic here. If they started winning those kinds of contests, Michael, given how hard they are, how data heavy they are, how the people that are likely to vote Reform, more anti-system, they don't even think those mayoralties should exist. I don't think it's. I don't think it was worth thinking about, really, if you're a progressive. If Reform won those mayoralties, I think it would be a really, really, really major deal. But you are right to say, look, Runcorn, Labour win by 6 votes, lose rather by 6 votes. Labour could have had a worse night, and if they'd kept Runcorn, the whole national media would have been like, is this the beginning of Keir Starmer turning things around? Stupid thing to say, of course. But those are the those are the kinds of moments on which major political inflections turn. In my mind, turns back to Batley and Spen. George Galloway, major player. I thought a week out from that by-election, he was going to win there. He had a terrible last week of campaigning. Labour win that by-election, of course, with Kim Ledbetter by several hundred votes. If they lose that by-election, Keir Starmer is out. Of course, fast forward, Keir Starmer is now the Prime Minister and he has a bigger majority than Margaret Thatcher did after any of her general election successes. These are the things that make a difference. Keir Starmer may ultimately be pushed out as Labour leader because of this by-election result. I don't think that. It's quite plausible. So I think they probably would have given up on one of those mayoralties, Michael, if it meant keeping Runcorn, because that's so important in terms of the wider national conversation.
Okay, we should say in terms of Dan Norris, you said the disgrace, Dan Norris, I suppose he still needs to face a jury trial. It's an ongoing case. We won't discuss that anymore. But you're right, the charges at least are very serious. Let's look at some of the councils, which again seem very dramatic. Durham, can we bring up Durham, Gary? So Reform take Durham Council. They didn't have any seats on the council before, and now they have 55. Labour have lost 30. So with 81, so this is, I'll start from the beginning actually. With 81 of 98 seats declared, Reform have won 55, which is up 55 because they didn't have any. The Liberal Democrats remain on 11. The Independents have lost some. And Labour have had a catastrophic night. They're down 30 to a mere 4 seats. The Conservatives also lost a lot. They're down 15 to 1 seat. So Reform just completely mopping up votes from Independents, Labour and the Conservatives, but especially from Labour. And because it's a similar story, let's go to Staffordshire County Council as well, if that's possible. So here with 33 of 62 seats declared, Reform have won 27. And that's from 0 because they didn't have any seats. And the Conservatives have lost 26, so they're down on 6. Labour so far have lost the only one that they had that has been counted. Obviously, you can see that it's half of the seats, or just under half the seats, still to be counted. But Reform will definitely be the largest party. Those are pretty dramatic, aren't they, Aaron? Like, just to go from a Labour majority lose. Well, I suppose it was no overall control in Durham, wasn't it? But to go from that many seats and just Reform to win kind of all of them. They've got the kind of majority that you have if, sort of those Labour seats, say like a London Labour seat where you say there's no opposition here because it's just so Labour that it's like a one-party county almost. Lots of parts of the country you think of like that, either of Labour or the Conservatives. But now Reform look like that in their first election in this county.
Yeah, it's utterly extraordinary. It's utterly extraordinary. I mean, we're now in a world, Michael, where Darren Grimes, who won in his ward, who was a council candidate in Durham I think he was in County Durham for Reform, he could now become one of the most powerful political figures in the north of England. I don't know who their group leader is going to be. Whoever, of course, is the Reform group leader will be the council leader. They'll be the leader of Durham Council. It's a big local authority. Politically, it's going to be really, really important for Reform. Darren Grimes, who started as a right-wing pro-Brexit YouTuber, is now Reform's King of the North. Okay, we are. I thought that would happen. I didn't think they would make this kind of an inroad and Labour losing 30 councillors. And I really think, Michael, people need to readjust their thinking. Some people have, but there's lots of people I've spoken to on the left, Michael, over the last 3 or 6 months. They didn't think this is going to happen. Darren Grimes controlling a local authority. What's wrong with you? Don't be stupid. He got sacked by GB News. No, he's very serious about becoming a credible national political figure. So if you have a politics which disagrees with him, maybe you should think about what you want to do with that. This is a really, really major breakthrough. I mean, it sounds like a ridiculous timeline. If you said to me, Aaron, in 2018, we're going to have Brexit, all this stuff's going to happen. I mean, I could believe a lot of it. Darren Grimes is going to be the leader of Durham Council. I mean, how? That doesn't really stack up. But he's won an election. We can say I didn't expect that. The guy almost won 50% of the vote in his ward. That's an extraordinary political accomplishment. And the question has to be, of course, to what extent are people voting for him or are people voting against Labour? Now, maybe I'm being unfair on Darren Grimes. I would say it's very much against Labour. And what I found in Runcorn, Michael, like I say, I was there last week. is that time after time after time, PIP, cuts to disability benefits, attacking people on welfare, and of course, winter fuel allowance being withdrawn from 10 million people. If Labour had not done those things, which, by the way, don't bring in very much money, we'd be looking at a completely different set of political outcomes. It defies belief. I mean, they would have kept Runcorn by thousands upon thousands of votes. They would have. I don't, for instance, see Durham going into reform majority territory. It defies belief. We've talked about this many times, Michael, but the winter fuel allowance going from 12 million recipients to just 2 million saves £1.4 billion a year. The political overhead for the Labour Party is utterly extraordinary. It was on the lips of absolutely everybody, even people who you might think of as low tax, right-wingers, they want a smaller state, couldn't believe that Labour's target was pensioners and the disabled, which it is, by the way, in terms of the political optics. Those were the people they were trying to attack, because in their world, in the world of Morgan McSweeney, the Labour right, you attack those people because you look credible and serious. Really, really, really big. And I think, like I say, I think the Aaron Banks story in the West of England is one of the major things to look at. And I think Reform winning Durham Council like that is enormous. It's enormous. Michael, they could form a majority government. And look, it's years away. The project might collapse this time next year. That's how radical politics works, both on the left and the right. It can be very volatile. Look at Corbyn, 2017, hung Parliament, 2019, huge defeat. The same can happen to Reform. You have clashes of egos, you have factionalism, etc. My God, look what factionalism did to the Labour Party when it was led by the left. Factionalism from the party's right, of course. The same could happen to Reform, of course it can. But when you're looking at results like that, we are looking at a trajectory here which does suggest Reform being in power. Right? Is that a majority government? That would be extraordinarily hard. It would be entirely without historic precedent. Some kind of confidence and supply with the Tories? Maybe. I mean, they'd probably pay a price for that, okay? But that's what we're looking at. And it really is incredible. And I have to say, Michael, I was watching the coverage of this overnight on the BBC. Sadly, there was a bit of a recount of one of the bundles in Runcorn, so I went to bed. And I was watching this on the BBC, and it was like watching a funeral. It was like watching paint dry. There was really very little animation or interest from Laura Kuenssberg and the people around the table. Very little personality, very little zip, very little oomph. What we're looking at here potentially are the first pangs of a political revolution. Now, I know those words are used all the time, particularly by people like us, but the discrediting of not just one of the two major parties, which of course happens all the time with a two-party system, one of them falls out of fashion. That's very common. For it to be happening to both, Michael, is utterly unprecedented. Okay, we're less than a year into the Labour government. You would expect the opposition to be picking up some kind of momentum. The Tories, in many ways, have had a worse night than Labour. And here's what's really interesting, Michael. The Liberal Democrats haven't done so well either. They've picked up councillors. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But given they picked up more than 70 seats in the last Westminster elections, given they now have, and think about the Liberal Democrat brand, Liberal Democrats go to Labour voters, keep the Tories out, vote for us. They go to Tory voters, keep Labour out, vote for us. They now get it with both sides, with Reform. Keep Reform out, vote for us. And yet they've still not made very big inroads. I find that really, really interesting.
Yeah, you said apparently the Lib Dems have more results coming this afternoon. We obviously don't know what results are coming, but there are more council results coming in this afternoon where the Lib Dems are likely to be competitive. The one we have at the moment is Devon. The Conservatives have lost Devon to no overall control. So after 56 of 60 seats declared, the Lib Dems are on 26, which is plus 17, and Reform are on 16, which is plus 16. And the Tories are down 29 and the Greens are up 4, Labour down 7. So it might be the case that sort of the Lib Dems look like they've had a better time by the end of this afternoon. A more dramatic result has come from Derbyshire, where Reform have gone from 0 seats to 32, and they have taken control of the council. So Labour have lost 11, the Conservatives have lost 24. I mean, I suppose because the most sort of dramatic outcome at the next general election, because people would say, obviously you've got to win a few MPs and build on that. And I think with councils, I've heard sort of it spoken about, my friends who are Labour councillors, sort of when you flip a council, at one election, you're trying to win a few so that you can be in a position to maybe win a majority at the next election. That's how Labour activists talked about Wandsworth. That's what they do. They made some inroads, I think sort of around 2017, and then they won the council in 2022 or maybe 2018 and 2022. Kind of those days. I'm not sure the exact year, but anyway, that's the normal process. People talk about this. Whereas Reform have gone from 0 to majority in so many councils, which does make you think that, because obviously a council election is first past the post. So you could, in theory, have Reform going from, I suppose it wouldn't be from 0, but from 5 seats to an overall majority in Westminster. It's not beyond comprehension, is it, Aaron?
No, but it is. I mean, it's entirely without precedent. We've had one major political party fall off and be replaced by another. It happened about a century ago with the Liberal Party being replaced by Labour. I believe the last Liberal majority government was Herbert Asquith. I believe the last Liberal government was Lloyd George. I could be wrong, but it's about a century ago. It's a very long time ago, and this would be more momentous than that, in so much as it would be much quicker. The rise of the Labour Party took they formed a minority government in 1929. It took 20 years. Okay, Reform, even 6 months out from the last general election, which is less than a year ago, 18 months ago, Reform are like a meme, okay? Now, I know they have some people who were involved in Brexit and UKIP. I get that. But in terms of their national polling, their polling average probably nationally 18 months ago was like, 3, 4, 5%. I can't remember. It's actually worth digging that out maybe for the show later on tonight. And now I think they can be credibly talked about as forming a government. And a majority government is plausible. You're right. I think as well, winning the authorities that you're talking about, I mean, the Derbyshire result is it's mind-boggling, isn't it? Is that winning councillors is really useful for a bunch of reasons for a new party. The same would apply for the Greens. It means that your activists can be paid. Okay. So if you in Durham now get 55 paid activists, it's not much money, like 13, 14 grand or whatever. Although, of course, some of them will be earning a lot more than that because they'll be the administration. They'll get the actual, the council roles. The group leader will become the council leader. That's decentish money, 40 grand, I guess. That's what Darren Grimes will be earning if he is the council leader, which is not confirmed. But, you get all your activists at least earning 12, 13, 14, 15 grand. And in the case of Durham, that's 55 people. Those are people who are now being paid to go and canvass and campaign and communicate, do casework for Reform candidates in that part of the world at the next general election. The same is going to apply in Staffordshire, in Derbyshire, and in other local authorities. So winning councillors is a really, really useful thing. Okay. Look at the Greens in Bristol. If you get 20, 25 Greens on Bristol City Council, that gives you the springboard to elect Carla Denyer, to get great results in other parts of the city, and probably at the next election win other MPs too. So, this idea that, you've got local elections, you've got national elections, they're two different things, because of course in the national media, the BBC, all that matters is Westminster. No, when you've got dozens of people paid by the taxpayer to effectively be involved in politics, it's a really useful thing, Michael. They also learn how to run things, right? And if Reform do want to run the country after 28, 29, actually having a cadre of people involved in local government for several years is going to be really important. It's going to be really, really, really important. They're going to learn lots of lessons, good and bad, right? And if you look at actually the experience of UKIP in local government, it was dreadful. It was a shambles. And I think that's now the major test for Reform. It's going to be sink or swim. They could do very well, and of course, then that presents a credible face to the electorate. We can govern. Look what we've done locally. Now give us a chance nationally. Or they're a complete disaster. I suspect they're doing so well nationally. I suspect it'll be a bit of a mix. But we'll see, right? That's all in the future.
We got a poll in the chat. Are you a Novara media supporter? We're going to talk a little bit now and much more this evening about sort of what's behind Reform's success. Why are right-wing populists doing better at the moment than those on the left? I mean, if you're looking at Reform and the Greens, it's night and day, isn't it? I mean, one reason is presumably because Reform essentially have a multi-million-pound channel campaigning for them day in, day out, which is GB News, right? So many of their hosts are either overtly or sort of covertly Reform adjacent. I mean, Nigel Farage has a show on the goddamn channel. And unlike Novara Media, they have millions and millions in venture capital. right? So we're not going to start a party, of course, but I think if you want a plural media, if you want a different side of, what did you say?
One day.
One day. I'm out of that game. Maybe you, maybe for you. But in any case, whether or not Aaron Bastani starts a party, I think you can understand that having Novara Media as an outlet that can continue to grow, putting forward a different side of the story is valuable in this moment. Well, I hope you agree. If you are already a supporter, thank you so much. You make this channel possible. If not, please do sign up at novaramedia.com/support. As I say, unlike GB News, we aren't funded by venture capital. We're funded by you guys. I think the average donation is about £8. So please do sign up if you can. We really, really do appreciate it. We're probably not going to go through any more results now because I don't think any more are coming in, and we're going to go through sort of all the council results much more comprehensively this evening, and we'll go through sort of the reaction from various party leaders as well this evening. I suppose I want your big picture, Aaron. Sort of, if this is this the end of the two-party system? And I mean, many of our viewers will be quite worried about we've been talking sort of quite, I don't know if I want to say objectively, but sort of descriptively about where the chances for reform, what could happen at the next general election. I suppose in terms of the impact for Britain, what it might mean for people who are worried about sort of the rise of reform. I wonder if you have any sort of commentary on that.
Well, I have a lot, Michael. I mean, before I say anything else, what we do at Novara Media is, I think, of critical importance to any successful progressive political project in this country. Reform does not exist to the extent that it now does without GB News. It doesn't. Now, there's one argument with regards to GB News, which, by the way, is partially true, which is that broadcast media in this country is broadly new Labour-ish, progressive-ish, and we want to create a platform for people that don't have those politics. And if you ask anybody in media, if they're honest, print media is generally favoured 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. Print media is generally favoured, or overwhelmingly favoured, the Conservative Party. Broadcast media has been fairer, but it's a bit more liberal lefty. Generally. Not always. I mean, Andrew Neil, for God's sake, was at the BBC, but generally. And that was the balance, the homeostasis. Now, what GB News has done is to disrupt that significantly, because now you've basically got the politics of a tabloid newspaper in broadcast. So I'm sympathetic to that argument that people with those views weren't represented in broadcast media. However, you have somebody like Matthew Goodwin, who's a presenter on GB News, actively campaigning for reform. Okay, you have Farage. To be fair to Farage, he was a political figure before going to. I think people know Farage's politics, right? But somebody might be watching Matthew Goodwin on GB News. They don't know who the guy is. He's a professor, so there's the sort of objectivity argument, but he's literally campaigning for reform. Okay, and again, look, they're not breaking any rules doing that, or they're breaking some rules, but not sufficiently for it to be causing them major problems. But I think looking at these results, Michael, and then reflecting on when people mocked Paul Marshall for spending 40 million on GB News and then 30 million. And I've had many smart people talk to me from the media, some of them conservative, who are like, he's just wasting his money. And I'm thinking, I wouldn't be so sure. I think it's a pretty good investment if you're worth what he is and you have his politics to be doing what he's doing. And again, to go back to my experience in Runcorn, Michael, a year ago, when people criticised immigration, it was, I'm not racist, but, or I think some immigration is good, but, right? Or this kind of migration is good, this is bad. It was, it's quite, that was the nature of the debate. It was quite measured in some ways. That's just completely gone, right? It's completely gone. And it's now about replacement, invasion, overtaking, attack, right? And that tone of the conversation is, I think, has been led by the media, right? You might say, well, it reflects objective reality. There was that Serco story about people being settled in the Northwest, for instance. Outrageous story, right? I don't think we should be managing refugee policy via Serco. I think it's outrageous, disgusting story. But that's clearly where that debate's being led. And like I say, I don't think reform has this kind of success without GB News. And it is extraordinary, Michael. I've been saying this to the trade unions for 10 years. The media is not going to stand still. It is going to go further to the right, which means politics goes further to the right. But they don't listen. They don't listen. People need to start listening. If you care about progressive values, progressive politics, you need to start thinking about an alternative to legacy media. The right have done it, by the way, and it's proving very profitable for them. We need to do the same. So, of course, support Novara Media, support our work. We're going to grow. We're going to be a major, major player, I think, over the next 3-4 years, not just on the left, but in the broader conversation. But also think beyond that too, right? You need to support the kind of media that you think creates a better kind of politics. If you don't, other people will, and you will find that your values and views are increasingly marginalized in society. So go to novaramedia.com/support if you fancy it. And in terms of the big picture, Michael, I think this is really big. I think we are looking at an emperor's new clothes situation, which is that the Conservatives have helped Labour and the Labour Party have helped the Conservatives in so much as they played by certain rules, certain norms, certain conventions. Both parties had zero personality, okay? And all of a sudden, you've got this new entity, loads of money, like you say, effectively its own TV channel, as well as some of the press. You know, the Telegraph is clearly now orienting itself towards reform. I think lots of the right-wing press will follow. Lots of money, lots of big celebrity endorsements. And they're not going to play by the same rules. Again, just going back to watching the TV coverage last night on the BBC, Michael, every single person going on Sky, on the BBC, but particularly the BBC, every single person going on to represent the Tories or Labour or the Lib Dems was really boring, really dull, right? Almost every person that was going on for reform, I think Dr. David Ball was the standout example for me. Personality. It was like watching daytime TV, okay? And I think that is a real vibe shift that the big two don't get. The big two are talking about delivery and the IMF said this, blah, blah, blah. They'll say it all day today. Keir Starmer will say it. And then you've got reform in Technicolor talking in the argot and the language of daytime TV. Good morning, Britain. This morning. Okay? And that's a huge, huge challenge, not just for the left. The left's off the pitch in some ways, right? It's a huge challenge for the centre and the centre left and the centre right. It's a huge challenge for the entirety of British politics. I personally think into that environment, the left now can make a huge contribution because we actually have some policies and some ideas and a critique. The Labour Party, the Labour leadership have no policies. They have no ideas. They have zero. Okay, this idea that Starmer would move left in office is absurd. Maybe you disagree about that, Michael. We can talk about that later on. So I think this is the beginning of a really, really big vibe shift, not just in politics and the outcomes and the results, but in the nature of what British politics is. I think people are seeing a different kind of politics or how politics is done. It's more fused with celebrity. It's more fused with TV culture. And it's very open to doing things really differently. And guess what, Michael? You don't have to like reform or support reform to understand that lots of people in this country want that. Lots of people want that. The amount of people, Michael, I've spoken to over the last 18 months who focus on housing and housing policy and then they're being let down by housing in this country and they look at it immediately through the prism of migration is extraordinary. And there is so little propositionally coming from the centre left and the left that it actually is, it's frightening how little there is propositionally coming forward. Novara makes its contribution. Our amazing supporters do the same. Some trade unions, the same, the RMT, for instance. But broadly speaking, it's all one way. And I think if you care about social democratic or socialist politics, you need to think very deeply about how that can change.
We've got the most important result of the day in Are You a Novara Media Supporter with 395 votes counted. Yes, 47%, not yet 53%, which means that I hope 53% of you are considering going to novaramedia.com/support so we can continue to grow this organisation and get a different message out there. Aaron, we're going to wrap up now, but we're going to continue this conversation at 6 p.m. So do make sure you guys come back for that. Any final thoughts that people need to know before we come back in 2 hours and 40 minutes, Aaron, or do you think people can wait?
Well, a lot's going to change, right? I think we've got about 50% of the council results through. We should have significantly more through. I hope you come back and join us. It's a beautiful day. There's a lot to talk about. And these are really, really major results and a major moment in UK politics.
Thank you so much for joining me, Aaron. There's so much to talk about. It definitely was worth doing a second stream, I think, on the day. So we will wrap up now. We'll be back at 6 p.m. for a usual episode in Novara Live. Obviously, it's gonna be a momentous episode because there's so much to talk about. But at the usual time in the usual format, we'll be back at 6 p.m. tonight.